Hi, and welcome back to my build series on YouTube. Uh, this is going to be a Magica Templar build for the Summerset Isles patch, or downloadable content that came out recently. A lot of changes happened to Magica, and a new skill line came out. It's been really great, and forming builds for this has been pretty good, honestly. Like, there's a couple of builds that really perform well, and some other builds will perform, in the middle of the road, but almost anything you run nowadays in Summerset it works really well if you know your rotations. So, without further ado, let's get into the Magica Templar build. So let's start with the skills. On the front bar, I'm running Elemental Weapon as my spammable. Infuse your weapon with power, causing your next light attack to use within 2 seconds to deal an additional 8,161 magic damage and applying the Burning, Concussion, Auric Shield elemental status effect. Basically, this is your spammable. I don't use the jabs. I use this. It's cheaper and a little bit easier to use, honestly, and it's not a big, long channel. Second skill is Purifying Light. You put this ability on first when you get to front bar because it copies damage, so any damage that you're doing to the target, it will copy it up to 22,155, and at that point it will explode after 6 seconds. So I'm also running Vampire's Bane. Vampire's Bane is a massive dot. It also does direct damage up front, kind of like Clench in a way. It's just a Templar version of it. When you use it, it also snares the enemy, and it gives you Major Prophecy, increasing your spell critical rating by 2,191. We don't really need that because we're running Inner Light. We run Inner Light not for that, though, because we get that from our spell power potions. What we run Inner Light for is the max Magica increase by 5%. And then your Mage's Guild passes as well will help that amplify even more. We're running Radiant Oppression for our Execute. Every class has an Execute except for the Dragon Knight, I believe. And basically, you need to be running your Executes, especially in trials situations where the boss's Execute is at like 20 million or lower. You need to be able to do a massive amount of damage to get that boss dead, because usually the mechanics get a little bit crazy during Execute, especially in like Maw of Lorcage or in Veteran Halls of Fabrication as well. Our ultimate is Fiery Rage. Fiery Rage, we're using this. You can use this for the AoE cleave and stuff like that, and maybe starting out a DPS parse, but we're really putting this on our front bar, because we don't have a Destruction Staff ability on our front bar, and we need one for the passives. So on back bar, we're running Blockade of Fire. Blockade of Fire is an 8-second AoE. It's a ground-based AoE, and it can cause the burning status, but when you do have burning up, burning enemies take 20% more damage from this ability, so you'll be doing about 5,000 on crit, depending if you have the burning status going, and probably more if you have Warhorn going as well, and raid buffs. Rearming Trap, we use this not for the Fighters Guild passives or anything like that, or even the physical damage, because that doesn't benefit us. We're using it for Minor Force, increasing our critical damage done by 10%. And it also resets. What you could run instead of this is Channeled Acceleration, which you cast this in the beginning of the fight, and then whenever it runs out, it lasts for 36 seconds. So if you do the math out, that's about four full rotations. So you'd use this instead of Trap Beast in a raid situation. For testing purposes, probably use Trap Beast. It's a little bit easier to manage. Puncturing... No, not Puncturing Sweep. We're using Blazing Spear. Blazing Spear is our second ground-based AoE. Um, it deals upfront damage and then over time damage as well. And allies can activate it for a synergy, a small one. It's not as good as the one that healers run, but it is a synergy nonetheless. Channel Focus is our sustain in our toolkit, and it also provides us major resistances. This effectively equates to about 480 extra Magica recovery on your tune. So if you have like 1,000 Magica recovery, then you will have 1,400, almost 1,500 Magica recovery if you're running this. So it's a very good sustain tool. I would suggest having this up at all times. We're running Harness Magica for our shield. It absorbs magic and restores magic every time you every time a magic projectile hits the shield. So it's pretty good for sustain. It does cost quite a bit of Magica, so just be careful with it. Only cast it when you need it. I just finished leveling Mage's Guild, so I haven't even started leveling Meteor yet. But when I do, it will be Shooting Star. I realized that I needed Meteor after my last DPS parse with this tune. I realized that my DPS was too high and the Destruction Ultimate was too expensive for me to be able to use that during Execute. So I decided to farm for Meteor and make sure I have that for the next time I'm needing to test out my abilities and work on a build. And it's also good to have anyway. Shooting Star is a great ultimate. Gives you ultimate back for every enemy that it hits, so it's worth having in your toolkit. Alright, so let's get into our champion points. In the blue tree, we're running 56 Elfborn for the extra critical damage. Elemental Expert, we have at 49 because we want the 11%. Bringing it up further than that would only increase it by 1%, and it's not really worth it. Spell Erosion is at 23. Staff Expert is at 14. I could probably take a little bit out of Master at Arms and bump up Staff Expert a little bit, just because I'm running Elemental Weapon. But 14 seems to work fine. It's good enough. And then we're running 52 in Thaumaturge because a lot of our skills base on that, like Vampire's Bane, and Radiant Oppression, and as well as your Elemental Wall of Elements there, and Blazing Spear, I believe, scale off of Thaumaturge as well. Alright, let's get into the character sheet. So, sure I swap here. So on front bar, we're running almost 37k max Magica, 17k health. And that's because we're running Valken Scoria right now. But if you are able to get in melee range, then I would suggest running Zan. Zan will lower your health considerably, and it will also lower your max Magica, but it will buff your damage quite a bit in melee. Our spell damage is 2,358, and that's because we're running the Apprentice. You could also run the Thief and get very similar results. It's up to you. 64 points into max Magica, and we are a dark elf, so we have fire resistances. We're also not a vampire. I decided to take that off because the sustain isn't really a problem on the Magica Templar. People say it is. In my opinion, it's not. And it's because of this ability right here. That's why. But so let's get into the gear. As far as our front bar is concerned, we're running Burning Spellweave. Burning Spellweave, every time you deal a flame ability, damage with a flame damage ability, you have a 15% chance to apply the burning status effect to the enemy and increase your spell damage by 507 for 8 seconds, and it can occur once every 12 seconds. So you could have this up theoretically about 66% of the time. Usually it's right around 60. It's not quite 66. Maelstrom Inferno, on the back bar, it's infused still, and we have the Berserker weapon damage and spell damage enchant on it, so it increases it by about 450, along with your 500. So you're increasing your damage with this build by about 1,000 spell damage anyway. So you're going to be sitting pretty at about 3,500 spell damage when you're fully buffed up, and that's not even counting your spell power potion, which will bring you up right around 4,000 spell damage or so. Let's see. So Zan will be our monster set. I don't have a good trait on this one, but I think I have a few in the bank. Anyway, so we're using Zan. Soroya is going to be our main set, where we use this on the body. And then Burning Spellweave again for jewelry. We're using one Bloodthirsty to increase our execute damage. It does lower our max Magica by about 800, but in my opinion, the extra damage at execute is well worth it, especially in long fights. Yeah, so what you would do is you would cast Elemental Drain, Channel Focus, you would get your Focused Acceleration going, and then Destruction Staff Ultimate. Once it had its first tick, you would cast your Blockade, Spear Shards, Swap, Light Attack, Purifying, Light Attack Vampire's Bane, and then you would weave in your Psijic ability until you got to 4 or 5, I believe, is where you would want to go. You swap, Light Attack, Blockade, Light Attack, Spear Shards, reapply all your things as needed, go back, Purifying Light, Vampire's Bane, and then you would weave your Psijic Spammable. And you do that, you basically do, I do like 4 or 5 weaves, depending. 3, 4, 5. Swap, reapply. When I cast Acceleration again, I do only 3 weaves on the front. That way I don't miss my ground dots being recast or anything like that. So the rotation's not terribly complicated. It's just mastering it, perfecting it, getting it to where you want it to be, and then doing content. Anyway, I hope this build helped you guys. Take care, subscribe if it helped, give a like, all that good stuff. See you guys in the next video.